And that's really what today's study in a big way is about too. When you get into the 6th and 7th seals, there are things that are going to happen. This is the thing that most people forget about the Book of Revelation. The Book of Revelation sets up a lot of stuff that has to happen before the second coming, but at the same time, it also reveals how quickly that stuff's going to happen. Like my interpretation, or the what I call the speedy theory of the 6th seal, for example, that we talked about last week. Everybody seems to put the 6th seal at a kind of a long time frame, but if you read it in the plain text, there's a lot of stuff that has to happen in that short space of time. Let me get it back up here. So that one. All right, if you look at the stuff that has to happen, right? I looked in the 6th seal and beheld there was a great earthquake. The sun becomes black. The moon becomes like blood. Stars fall from heaven. Fig tree, like a fig tree, drops its figs when shaken by wind. And then the seeds receded as a scroll, and everything gets shaken. That's one thing. But at that same time, the kings of the earth, great men, rich men, commanders, mighty men, slaves, and free men, all run to the rocks and caves and say, "Kill me, please, because I'm afraid of what the Lamb's going to do." That, to me, the fact that you've got all this stuff happening... Now, nobody's going to go and turn around and say, "Oh, there was an earthquake in Lisbon 140 years ago. I must be concerned." No. This is what the Book of Revelation brings out. It's these sorts of things that happen in such dramatic spaces that we have to really be engaged with them. You know what I mean?
Yep.
Yeah. So,
Good hope.
Do we want to use that as a segue to starting? Okay.
Yeah, I think that's a great way to start.
That's what we're leading off. So, from last week, as we look, the thing that preceded this, though, is that 5th seal. Now, the thing that preceded that in a big way is this 5th seal. He opens the 5th seal, and under the altar is the souls of those who've been slain. So, this 6th seal has to follow that 5th seal, and they are begging for righteous judgment. They are begging for vengeance in a form. They are demanding that God does something. How long, O Lord, holy and true, until you judge and avenge our blood on those who dwell on the earth? So this 6th seal is the answer to that 5th seal. And we're still in that time frame when we move into chapter 7. We're still looking at these martyrs for Christ who had been given white robes and were told that there's just got to wait a little while longer until these things are avenged. And then this judgment starts. Now, this is only the start of the judgment. This is only the real beginning of this judgment phase that we see. And
can I just ask a question about the 5th seal just before we go on from that?
Yeah.
The reference to the altar, is that, that's kind of temple language, I'm guessing?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
And is that altar of incense, I'm guessing it's altar of incense, but I don't know. Have you got any comment on that?
I would say to be the altar of incense, but it could also be the altar outside. Considering that these are obviously the righteous of God, it could also be the altar outside where the laven of the big brass bowl laver was. Where they did the sacrifices. I would certainly say, in terms of the physical location, you're probably talking about the incense altar. But it's definitely in that holy space. It's definitely in that space reserved for the for the priests. It's certainly in that sort of an area, yeah.
Okay.
The temple language is something we will get to closer to 14, 15, 16, and I don't. With our Wednesday studies, when are we going to go through Hebrews? Because that'll be coming up soon too, isn't it?
Well, Hebrews doesn't fit in the sequence because, unless we go extra biblical to get a sense of when that was. You suggested that might have been Eutychus's, didn't you?
Yeah, I did.
The sermon. So that's on the third missionary journey. So I'm guessing, probably after Romans and Galatians.
Okay, that's fine. Well, we'll talk about where we'll tee it up with either with these studies or with your studies and work it out, because the that sort of language is very much centered in the book of Hebrews more than it is in Revelation. Hebrews opens up. What we're looking at is more the way that events take place. Paul in Hebrews gives the temple side of things, right? This is more or less just assuming holy people will be saved, but we will get into that in 14 and 15, if you're okay with that. So yeah, but I would say this: there's no altar in the most holy place in the Old Testament tabernacle.
No, not in the most holy place, just the holy place.
You've got one in the holy place, the altar of incense, as you said, and and what would technically be called an altar of shewbread, but the altar of incense is there. That would be the most likely place for it, because again, you've got that intercessory spot. You've got the spot when Christ is there, and again, he's opening this seal, and he sees people under this altar. So the Lamb has to be in that holy place for the seal to be open. So he has to be in that temple space for that seal to be open in that way. So you're absolutely right in bringing that out. But I think that it matches when we get into chapter, is it 11, where we start talking about the actual space of the temple. We'll find too that the outer court are left for the unnumbered multitude. So I would certainly say that it's in if we want to drill it down, it's in the holy place.
So you just mentioned about the seals and the opening of the seals. So is that in the most holy place? Like God the Father's in the most holy place, I'm guessing.
This is the first time we've got a reference to where the Lamb is when he's opening the seals. Because if he's there and these guys are starting a conversation with him, then he has to be in the holy place.
Yeah. But I mean, we've had earlier that who is worthy to open the seal, and Jesus is the only one who's worthy. Yeah. But to be able to actually reach out and take the scroll that's got the seals, is there a temple connection to that event? Does that happen in the most holy place where God is? I guess God's presence is over the.
No, because God the Father's not in the holy place. Then the most holy place. Then he's on his throne. If we go back,
and is the throne? Is there a reference to the throne in the temple at all?
No,
I'm
absolutely.
Actually, getting a little bit of cross messages here. There, once I had somebody say to me that the throne is located on the table of showbread, and I'm thinking, how's that? But anyway, so you haven't heard anything about that?
Let's go back here to chapter 4 and 5. Okay, so chapter 4, John is in the Spirit, and he sees a door standing in heaven saying, "Come up, and I will show you the things that must take place after this." Immediately I was in the Spirit and beheld a throne set in heaven. So we have a throne in heaven. One sat on the throne, like jasper and sardis, and there's a rainbow. This is God the Father. We've established that. So we are looking at a throne in heaven, surrounded by people. So this is not a private space. This is a very public space. He's surrounded by 24 elders. Then he's surrounded by the 7 lamps, and he's surrounded by the sea of glass, the 4 living creatures, and pretty much all of the hosts of heaven. So this is a very public space. This is heaven's throne room. So when we open chapter 4 here, we're in the throne room of heaven. We're in that central spot where God the Father holds court, where God the Father speaks to the whole universe and gives instructions to his angels. And, we're going to go and create a universe over in Alpha Centauri this time. We're going to do this. This is the throne room of heaven. Then, in his right hand, so we're still in the throne room of heaven, there is a scroll written inside and on the back, so it's written on all over, with 7 seals. Now that's in his hand in this throne room. And a strong angel proclaims with a loud voice, asking who's worthy to open it. So we're still in this throne room in heaven. No one in heaven or earth could open it, and everybody cries. And then a lamb that was slain. I looked and beheld in the midst of the throne, so still in this throne room of heaven, in the middle of the 4 living creatures, in the middle of the elders, a lamb that had its throat slit, a lamb that, as if it had been slain, with 7 horns and 7 eyes, the 7 spirits of God. The lamb takes the scroll out of the right hand of him. So we're still in this throne room up to this point. And then when the lamb takes the scroll, everybody starts singing a new song. and everybody starts bowing down and worshipping. So we're still in the throne room there. Then in chapter 5 and 6...
So sorry, just where the reference to the slain lamb, you don't think that's a reference to the altar in the outside court?
It can't be, because it says there, I looked in the midst of the throne and of the 4 living creatures, and in the midst of the elders, a lamb as though it had been slain. The lamb is standing
so that's
on
still
the throne.
In the midst. Yeah, okay.
So we're still in that space. We're still there. This is what John the Revelator does. He frames these things to phase over things, but not connect up perfectly. Which is the same as what we've seen with the first 4 seals. The first 4 seals relate to the phase of and development of the Christian church, but then the last part doesn't match up so evenly because it moves on to a different thing. You can use things to connect up and overlap, but then there's a certain point where you have to go your own way and talk about something else. In the same way, these seals are talking about judgment and what's the word? Not profit. Inheritance. These seals are about judgment and inheritance. So the first 4 seals layer up, and then they move on. And what we find here, as we said, is that when these lamb open these seals, so here I saw in chapter 6 here, when the lamb opened one of the seals, he still must be standing on the throne. He opens the second seal, he hasn't moved. Third seal, there's no movement. Fourth seal, no movement. But when he opens the 5th seal, now where he is not clear. As far as we can deduce, he's still standing in that throne. But these people under the altar, so John is introducing the temple language, start having a conversation with him. That's not unusual because, of course, God can be everywhere. But these people in that altar, from under the altar, start a communication with the Lamb and saying, okay, how long until you judge the world and avenge our blood? So I would argue from this moment, the Lamb is still standing, if you want to put it in that sort of language, in the throne. He's still there in the throne opening the scrolls. Because this is where we also have to remember Christ has several different, I don't want to use the word personas, but he has different roles to play. In this particular position, he is playing the part of the lamb that was slain, whose sacrifice is worthy. When Christ stands in front of the most holy place, or in the holy place and most holy place, and offers his blood as sacrifice, we have to remember he's the high priest standing there, he's the blood in the bowl, he's the sacrificed lamb left out on the outside. He's also the one that says to God, "I've saved these people," and then he's also the one that's on earth, or spiritually on earth, inspiring them to do his will. So he has all these different roles in that same scene.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? I know that gets really complicated, but does that make sense?
Well explained. I like the way you went about that. Thank you.
Are you okay, David?
Yes, I'm all right with it. Yep.
Okay, so if we're good, this is it. When we have him here, these people are certainly under. Where am I? These people are certainly under the altar, and they're crying out from that holy place, saying, "Can you judge the earth?" And the judgment starts here in the 6th seal. Are we all with me? Are we all together?
Yep.
Okay, so when we move into chapter 7, as we said, we open, and I shouldn't have closed that. We opened this the chapter 7 with this question, right? When the mountains and rocks are being asked to fall on all these people, the reason that these people are afraid is that they are afraid of the wrath of the Lamb, and they pose this question: in the great day of his wrath, who is able to stand? Who is able to endure the wrath, the anger, the bitterness, the vitriol, the aggression of this Lamb? Who is able to stand up to Christ's anger? And that's the question, because seeing these souls under the altar must make him devastatingly upset. There's no way that he's happy about these people who've been put to death. There's no way that he's enjoyed watching these 4 horsemen come and destroy the earth. There's no way that he's happy with any of this. So he's angry. And these people recognize that he's angry, and what's about to happen is pretty angry. But chapter 7 opens in a rather fascinating way. After these things, after he sees these people running around, after John sees all these people freaking out, after he sees all of these events happening, I saw 4 angels standing on the 4 corners of the earth, holding onto the 4 winds of the earth. So he's holding onto those 4 winds, the 4 winds of strife, that they should not blow on the earth, the sea, or on any tree. And then I saw another angel ascend out of the east, having the seal of the living God. And he cried with a loud voice to the 4 angels whom it was granted to harm the earth and sea. Harm is a strong word. These are not just going to be, they're not just going to be letting things happen. These are going to be actively engaging and directing the pain and pressures and judgments that happen on the earth. But this angel says, don't harm the earth, the sea, or the trees until we have sealed the servants of our God in their foreheads. I heard the number of those who were sealed of is 144,000 of all the tribes of Israel. Now, these angels are holding back those judgments. God has said, okay.
Hang on, James. Can you just hang on? I've got someone knocking at the door, mate.
Yeah, go for it.
I won't be long.
No trouble. We shall pause here for a few moments.
Yeah.
Does that make sense? Is that okay, John? Make more sense?
Yeah, no, it's good. The reason I wanted to ask the question about the temple is because I know we move into temple language a little bit later.
Yeah.
And I kind of just wondered where it started and how that transition from what's now the throne room to the temple happened. So
the Book of Revelation has these. It has these overwhelming layers. It has these. I'll just unmute you, David. It has these. I muted you up, David. So you might need to unmute yourself, mate. It has these different layers as these things go over it. So it starts at these same sort of points. It starts at these same sort of central spots. And then it just adds more onto it so that it can extend in its own way. Because each of these things talk about different things. So we're going to look at, when we look at the trumpets next week, they start in a similar sort of spot, but they are done for a different thing because the trumpets are about, they herald the judgment in. They take up from this post, but they herald in the judgment. So these different things work in these different ways. Does that make sense? Yeah. You're good, David?
He's back.
Yep, we're back.
Okay, so chapter 7. These 4 angels are holding back the judgments. God has said, God is ready to do the judging, but he has to sort of take a step back and say, well, if I'm going to harm the earth, if I'm going to do pain and pressure to the earth, not everybody's worthy of that. Everybody has to get this. Remember what we're talking about here. This book that he's holding is the inheritance of Israel, the inheritance of the earth. This is that's why when we say judgment and we say things that are being released and being given, this book is the book of life, but it's also the book of all of the acts that are going on the earth. It's a book of very great importance. Not everybody wants to receive that. Not everybody is worthy of receiving that. Hopefully the 3 of us are not worthy of receiving the massive pains and pressures of that judgment. So these angels are told, hold on a second here. There are people that are not going to be harmed. So don't harm the land, sea, or trees until we seal them up, until we protect them, until we lock them down. We've seen this locking down before in Moses. This is the same type of locking down. We saw it when Moses, at the last plague, was told to put the blood on the doorposts and protect the people from God's wrath, from God's final plague. So this is not a new concept. None of this is new concepts. None of this is new at all. John is going back and using the language, and God is using the symbolism he's already done to deal with the world to keep going. But there's an interesting reinforced thing here. We're told we're not to harm the sea or the land or the trees. We've got a new word in this thing. We've already seen the sea. We saw that in Daniel very carefully. We saw that the sea relates to large groups of people. And we've already seen the trees. The trees relate to important people or holy people or people doing God's will. But now we have the land introduced as well. Who can this land refer to? It has to refer to another group of people. And this is an important part for us to consider. Because now, let us remember what time frame we're talking about. The gospel has gone to all the world. There's no more a holy nation. There's no more a holy group that lives on the earth. The Jews are scattered. They're diaspora. They've been scattered across the world, both at this time frame, 40 years after the destruction of Jerusalem, and because of the gospel going to the Gentiles through Paul's work. So there's no longer any association between a specific bloodline and salvation. That is done away with. That has been discarded. So the land is introduced as people outside of those groups, as people outside of those collective parts. The way that we look at this and we say, all right, what does that actually relate to? Well, the best way we can look at this is if we say that the original grouping was those Jewish nations set up across that Middle Eastern, North African, European, Mediterranean area. The land has to refer to everywhere around that. So we've now got three different groups of people. The holy, the collective peoples in the European, Asian area, Middle Eastern area, and the rest of the world. And all three of them are told not to be harmed here. But when we look at this seal, what is this seal? What does this seal do? How does this seal work when we say that this is a protection, a sign, a symbol, a marker that distinguishes the servants of God from everybody else? That is one of the most important questions in Adventism, and I'm going to start acting like an Adventist apologist here. And this is the core of a reason why I'm a member of the Adventist Church, because when we start to dig into this seal, we have to look at the importance of what it is. Firstly, we have to remember this seal is in their foreheads. So this is something that's being put in their minds. This is not a thing that is just something that's there. It's got nothing to do with faith, because faith is felt in your heart. In the old Jewish traditions and even most of the ancient traditions in the European areas, you felt things with passion in your heart. You felt things, you were convicted of beliefs and things you felt in your heart. Because when you believe something, and it's language we still use, I feel that in my heart. When you feel emotions, when you feel sadness, when you feel, unhappy, emotions, bitterness, they're felt in the stomach. But the intellect is where the Greeks lived. The Greeks lived in the mind. The Greeks changed their traditions and changed their ideas based on what they were convinced of. So the forehead is something intellectual. Now, this is universal across most ancient traditions. But this also can't be a physical mark for three reasons. It's banned in the Levitican law. The Levitican law bans branding, and it bans tattoos. The Romans, until the very, very late times, also considered tattoos or physical marks to be very, very shameful, very shameful marks. And the third thing is you would only brand someone in this ancient time if they were a slave. And these people are not presented as slaves. So this is not a physical mark. We can dismiss the idea completely in any way, shape or form that the idea of the mark of God is a physical mark. So if we're making these deductions, it has to be holy because it's coming from God. This is an angel coming from the throne saying, we are going to put the seal of on the foreheads of the servants of God. We're going to protect them. So it has to be a holy thing. It has to be an intellectual thing. It can't be a physical thing. But it has to be something visible. It has to be something that can be demonstrated. It has to be something. This is a seal in their forehead. So the language being used here is certainly analogous with that of tattoos or with branding and those sorts of things. It has to be something that can be seen. What makes people holy? Well, we have faith in God, which is not exactly an obvious thing. It's not like we all walk around wearing Christian rings. I was given a Christian ring by one of the teachers at William when I left, a nice bloke who I was very touched when he gave me that, and I've been wearing it ever since. But, not everyone has the ability to wear these, so it can't be something that is visible like that. So when we demonstrate our faith through our actions. The best thing that comes to that is the Ten Commandments, because they are the ones that were separate and set up, established outside of the Jewish law. We've talked about this in the past. The Ten Commandments in Exodus 20 are different from the Ten Commandments set up in Deuteronomy. And they are set up because they are outside of the covenant structure made with Moses. They are set up outside of the covenant structure with them. So let's have a look at them. God said, I'm the Lord your God who brought you out of the land of Egypt. When we look at a seal like this, a seal has to be established on some sort of authority. What is the authority of this particular type of seal? A seal, as we talked about when we were looking at the seals in chapter 4 and 5, it has to be the authority of an individual. It has to generally have their name, and it has to have a scope. So when we open Exodus 20, God starts out by saying, I'm the Lord your God. That's who I am. I brought you out of the land of Egypt and out of the house of bondage. That's my authority. Then he goes into his laws. You're going to have no gods before me. Okay? You're not going to make yourself any carved image or in the likeness of anything that's on heaven and earth or anything beneath the earth or anything under the water. You'll not bow down to them, serve them, for I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children to the third and fourth generation of those who hate me, but showing mercy to thousands. Now, in this language, in this third commandment, we have something standing out. God reinforces his name. I, the Lord your God. He reinforces his authority. I am a jealous God, and I'm able to visit iniquity to everybody. He also establishes his scope. I am the timeless God. I line up everything over the timeliness. So there is a possibility that the third commandment could stand up as being the thing. So worshipping of idols could be this seal. Those who step away from worshipping idols, we were talking on the other day about Paul talking about food sacrifice to idols. This is one of those ones that certainly fits the bill. Let's keep reading. You will not take the name of your Lord God in vain, for the Lord will not find him guiltless. That has an element of it, but it sort of steps away. Remember the Sabbath day to keep it holy. 6 days will you labor and do all your work, but the seventh day is the Sabbath of the Lord your God. In it you will do no work, nor your son, nor your daughter, your male servant, your female servant, your cattle, your stranger within your gates. For in 6 days the Lord made heaven and earth, the sea, and all that's in them, and rested on the seventh day. Therefore the Lord blessed the Sabbath day and hallowed it. Now, we can very quickly just simply say the rest of these: honor your father and mother, don't murder, commit adultery, steal, or anything else. These other ones don't have that same gravitas of the second or fourth commandments. But the fourth commandment here stands out again in a very different form. It's another demonstration of God's name, right? The Lord your God. In the 6 days the Lord made heaven. It also is the only one that says remember. Remember something. This is the only one that invokes a particular forward action. All these others are don't do a thing. Honor your father and mother really should be translated don't dishonor your father and mother, right? Don't steal, don't murder, don't commit adultery, don't do these things. Don't make yourself a graven image and don't bow down to them. But this one is a positive instruction. I want you to do something. Again, it still has the name of God in it, and it still has the scope, but it has a broader scope, and it gives an instruction to a broader scope. You're not going to do anything. Neither is your wife, your son, your daughter, your male or female servants, not even your cattle are going to be able to go out and tread down corn and stuff. Not even the stranger who's hanging out in your gates. If Jim comes over and stays the weekend, you and he are going to sit back and relax for the Saturday, because even he's not allowed to do anything. You're given authority through this commandment. So this is a commandment that really stands out. And it's as I say here, it's those ones that step out in such a big way. It's also the longest of the commandments. And it's the only one that encourages the follower to emulate God's actions. God rested on the Sabbath day. Be like God. It's the only one that says you have to do those things that are very much along the same actions of what God did. So this is the one that I would argue, for a start, is the one that fits best in this model of being a sign. But God even reinforced that. God reinforced that a bit. He said in Exodus 31, Speak to the children of Israel, saying, my Sabbaths you shall keep. It is a sign between you and me throughout your generations, not just for the time of the covenant, throughout your generations, so that you know that I am the Lord who sanctifies you. In Ezekiel, he said, therefore I made them go out of the land of Egypt. He sets up his authority. I brought them into the wilderness. I gave my statute and showed them my judgment, which if any man does, he will live by them. I gave them my Sabbaths, aside from my statutes, he says. Outside of the 10 Commandments, I also gave them my Sabbaths, to be a sign between them and me, that they might know I am the Lord who sanctifies them. It's a separation there. And then a little bit further down in verse 18, he says, but I said to the children of the wilderness, do not walk in the statutes of your fathers, nor observe their judgment, nor defile yourselves. I am the Lord your God. Walk in my statutes, keep my judgments, and hallow my Sabbaths. They are a sign between you and me. This is at a time when Israel is, as clearly stated here, don't walk in what your fathers and the old men of your village say. Walk in my statutes and keep my Sabbaths. The Sabbaths are the sign between you and me. This is at a time when all of the Mosaic law was being abandoned. But God chose not to reinforce all that, but to reinforce the Sabbath specifically. So the Sabbath is drawn out in this way as, if not the only element, a very, very important element of that seal of the living God. And we have looked ad nauseum, as well as the various Roman and Protestant churches moving the Sabbath from Saturday to Sunday as a concept. What we haven't looked at is how that fits in with this Laodicean church and this time of the end, this position around when this second coming, this sealing work and this close of probation work happens. Is there a connection between the time frames of these seals, the time frame after 1798, when we conclude that the fourth seal, the fourth horseman, more or less ends and the Christian church continues in that vein, but is there a time frame after that? Well, Ellen and James' wife were not Sabbath keepers when they were born. They were brought to the Sabbath truth by Captain Joseph Bates. Very famous story of Captain Bates walking across after he had read a pamphlet by T.M. Premble, who was a Seventh-day Baptist minister in New Hampshire. He'd read this, and in 1845 he became convicted that the Sabbath was the truth. And somebody, I'm not sure if it was James White or somebody else, crossed him on a bridge and he said, "What's the news, Captain Bates?" And he said, "The Saturday is the Sabbath." That was the powerful message that he took from that. And Premble was also instrumental in the conversion of J.N. Andrews, who was the Adventist Church's first missionary. But unfortunately, Premble would actually repudiate his work later on in life, which is why Bates is remembered in our church as the apostle of the Sabbath. And he wrote one of his first booklets that he wrote on the topic, was published in 1846, where he defines the seventh-day Sabbath as a perpetual sign. Now, this is the important part. The conversion from the Sunday Sabbath to the Saturday Sabbath is not a faith reaction. When you sit there and look at those things, you don't get a faith reaction from this. You don't sit there and become convicted of this simply because you are communing with God and listening to what nature tells you. It is an intellectual conviction. It is an intellectual change that you have to be convinced of, as indeed Joseph Bates and Ellen and James White did, as indeed T.M. Premble did when he first wrote his pamphlets. It is something that comes and sits outside of the regular realms of theology and the regular realms of faith. So it's something that's intellectual. Again, fitting nicely that the seal is on people's foreheads. If you bow down and worship an idol, as it says in this other option, in the second commandment, don't make a graven image or any likeness, bowing down before that is part of a ritual that's done in a lot of churches that simply is part of the activities. It's not something that you really consider. It's not something that is overwhelmingly intellectual. But the decision on which day to step out of your comfort zone and worship the living God, that is an intellectual conviction that sets apart. Does that make sense to you guys? Are you with me?
Yep.
Now, I haven't made it a rule, but I've made it a principle to avoid using Mrs. White's writings for this study because I don't want her. She revealed a lot of this stuff to us, but she is not the reason why we believe this stuff. But I did find that in research, and Fred put this in his notes too, that there was an important statement that she had in Patriarchs and Prophets, where she said, the Sabbath is not introduced as a new institution, but as having been founded at creation. It is to be remembered and observed as the memorial of the Creator's work, pointing to God as the maker of heaven and earth, and it distinguishes the true God from false worship. The other gods control a thing, right? Diana controlled love and sex. The Bacchus controlled drinking. The other gods had a thing. Our God controls everything. It distinguishes us from the false god. All who keep the Sabbath signify by this act they are the worshippers of Jehovah. Thus the Sabbath is the sign of man's allegiance to God, as long as there is any on earth to serve him. The fourth commandment is the only one of the 10 in which are found both the name and title of the lawgiver. It's the only one that shows whose authority the law is given, and thus it contains the seal of God affixed to his law as evidence of its authenticity and binding force. Now, I'm not presenting that because I want to use Mrs. White as a support for this argument. I'm presenting that because it is the best, it's one of the better ways of phrasing that. I'm not going to try and use Mrs. White every 5 minutes when we look at things here, and the fact we're almost halfway through the book should demonstrate that. But there are some beautiful passages from her that do demonstrate what we are trying to say, and that she really was the lesser light that pointed to the greater. Now, okay, so is that? Do you want any questions on that as the seal? Do you have any alternative? I haven't actually seen any alternatives to that as a viewpoint. But are we okay with what I've done there before I move into being an apologeticist?
Yeah, I like the way you've sort of gone back into Ezekiel and so on, and sort of established the historical way of thinking about it. And,
as David's about to say, I didn't do it, Fred did it.
No, I wasn't going to say that.
I'm not taking credit for it. It was my grandfather's work. But yeah, are you okay with that, John? Sorry.
Yeah, no.
So,
pardon me for eating my lunch here, guys.
That's all right.
No, you're all right.
If we move this into a little bit more of the more contemporary moments, this is the authority on which the Seventh-day Adventist Church holds itself as the current, and I stress the word current, claim to be the embodiment of the Church of God. This is the point on which we state we are one of the few churches that preach and practice the Sabbath. We are one of the few that actually hold this. And as we've always called ourselves children of the Word, this is the core unit on which we have said we are an intellectual church. Again, the seal affixed to the forehead. So this is that central spot that the Adventist Church holds itself to being the church of the current embodiment of the Church of God. Now, when I say current embodiment, I want to be very, very clear on what I'm saying. I am not saying the Adventist Church is the Church of Laodicea and is the Church of the living God today, and everybody else should abandon their others, although they should. What I'm saying is that as it is currently embodied, our doctrines and our principles, what we teach and what we act in, the Seventh-day Adventist Church is the only church that holds these truths in this way and with this level of authority. That does not mean...
What about Jehovah's Witness?
Jehovah's Witnesses go to church on Sunday.
No, they don't. They go on Saturdays, don't they?
I thought they go on Sundays.
Sunday.
But Jehovah's Witnesses don't believe that Jesus is a created being. They don't believe in the divinity. They believe in the sub-divinity of Christ, but not in the divinity of Christ.
Oh, right. I thought they always went on Saturdays.
I thought they were Sundays. I'll have to check that. But they have other issues in as much as they don't believe that they believe that the when we get to it, they believe that the establishment of the New Jerusalem will be on earth. They believe that Jesus was a created being. They say he was the first created thing made. And there are we can go into a study on that as well. They have a bunch of other issues that go along with them.
Yeah.
But we're the only ones that hold this principle in this way. They also, that's where we sit as apart. Now, again, I'm not saying that all Adventists will be in heaven. That's absolutely not what I'm saying. We still have to remember that everyone has an individual choice, and the choice is still left to us. I'm also not saying that the church is going to be the church that will be there when this sealing work is done. Because this sealing work, as we see in this language of chapter 6, the language that we have here in chapter 6 is very aggressive. The a massive earthquake, the sun becoming black, the moon like blood, freaking out all of the people, the great men, the rich men, the commanders, the mighty men, every slave. The people, this is what a time which we refer to as the shaking of the church. It's what we refer to as the entire world and the entire dynamics of the world shaking and being shook to its very core. There's going to be a great number of Adventists who won't be able to stand up to that. There's going to be a great number of Adventists, unfortunately, Mrs. White is clear on this, that will not be able to go through. And I would argue that it's very unlikely that the Adventist church in its current form will come through that completely. I don't personally believe there will be a formal church that constitutes the 144,000. But what we can say is that the 144,000 do embody what the church's doctrine currently is. The way the doctrine currently exists is that the church is what the church currently teaches. So whether the church is broken up and different groups of the church go in different ways, but they all maintain their reliance on the Ten Commandments and their reliance on the Fourth Commandment, I don't know. And I'm happy to be wrong on this point. But while the Adventist church today teaches this, there is a lot that will happen that will break the church into pieces, as we'll see. Does that make sense to you? I'm not against the church. I'm certainly in favour of the Adventist church today, but there's a lot that's going to happen. Are you with me?
Yep.
I think there's a concept that's worth mentioning too, James. You know, you talk about the current sort of organisation or institution that is holding to the understanding of Scripture. And that other concept is the one of present truth. The notion of present truth is that truth is progressive, and that just as at one time, like Luther's aha moments about righteousness by faith was a really major present truth, and then later on, you know, baptism by immersion as opposed to sprinkling was a truth. So there's been a progressive discovery of truth, and I think if we were to say that we have now discovered all the truth that is ever going to be discovered, I think we would be being a little bit boastful or a little bit arrogant.
That would be pretty impressive. No, I agree with that, yeah. And we will find, I mean, Mrs. White, one of the things that that really sticks in my head is Mrs. White says there will be a moment when Adventist people will go to their ministers and say, you didn't teach us this, you didn't teach us that, we claim to have everything and we weren't taught about these particular things. I don't remember specifically what it was referring to, but there will be things that the Adventist, and we've seen it in the last few years, if I can bag the church, and I'll remind everybody again that I'm a fourth generation and still a member at your church, there are a lot of things that we have simply let slide, and we have let our doctrines go by the wayside in the same way the Waldenses did, in the same way the Lutherans did, in the same way other groups have. So you're absolutely right. Truth is a progressive thing that we have to stick with. And there's even a demonstration there in T.M. Premble. You know, he realized the concept of the Adventist of the Seventh-day message. He was a Seventh-day Baptist minister, and before he died, he repudiated his thing. He said, I'm not going to believe in the Seventh-day Sabbath anymore. So, yeah, this is... It comes to all of us, but, yeah. Anyway.
The same is true of some of the early leaders of our church, you know, Wagner and Jones, who were a very influential group through the 1880s.
They revealed the concept of righteousness by faith to us, absolutely.
But by the time you get to the 1900s, they've gone a little bit too far, or they're a little bit too extreme, or that their words can't be taken with the authority that they previously were given.
Even John Harvey Kellogg, he gave us the cornflakes recipe. The cornflakes we buy from Sanitarium taste the same as the one from Kellogg's because he gave us the recipe, but he ended up having disagreements on the health message, and he stepped away and did his own thing. I don't know whether he ever repudiated his membership, but he certainly went and did his own thing. So, and that's it. I don't, and I have never claimed and will never claim that everything that I say in these studies is absolutely accurate. In fact, the more I go back over them, the more I realise how much I've got to go and re-record things to make them clearer and to make them more linguistically accurate. But anybody who thinks that they're speaking absolute truth is completely nonsense. But yeah. Okay, so who is being sealed? Now, we've already established that there is a lot of people being sealed, and the number of them, according to verse 4 here, is 144,000 of all the tribes of Israel. We won't go through them individually, but we will take note of one thing, and that is that the tribe of Manasseh is included, which is the tribe that came from Joseph, as in the... no, that's a different thing again. We'll talk about that later. The tribe of Judah is the one that leads out, which is a different thing to what normally happens. The tribe of Judah, of course, was Christ's tribe. Christ was from the tribe of Judah. Christ is called the Lion of Judah. It's the tribe that David came from. So it's interesting to note that, but I'm not sure whether it has any major significance, except to say that Jesus was from the tribe of Judah, and it takes some level of precedence. As to whether or not these are an order of precedence, I don't think they are, which is what some people have said. And this is one of those very heavily debated areas. Excuse me. This is a set of topics that are extremely heavily debated both inside and outside the Adventist Church about what these 144,000 are and who they are. And I think that the importance of them is not so much that they are listed, but that they are listed as the 12 tribes of Israel. The fact that they are listed in this way is what is the important factor. Debate over these people has gone on for literally 2,000 years. And Mrs. White says very bluntly, it is not Christ's will that we get into controversy over the questions which will not help us spiritually. That's a really good piece of advice when we look at these. And who composes the 144,000 is not something we need to care about. We are not a church that actually runs a list. I believe it's the Jehovah's Witnesses that you mentioned before, David, who actually have a list of 144,000 people that they believe they're going to hand to Christ and say, here's who you put in the top bill. This is, to me, that's a nonsense. What's more important is the what these people are. The fact they are sealed from each of the 12 tribes in equal number indicates the what of these people is that they are to be the new children of Israel. These are the re-embodiment, the re-establishment, the replacement for the tribes of Israel who left Christ and left God's word behind. This 144,000 are those who are the ones who stand and are the ones who are counted as God's holy people. The fact they are sealed at that close of probation before these winds of strife give us a good indication that they are also going to become from the group that are alive and remain, as it says in 1 Thessalonians, at the second coming of Christ. And that they are separate from what we're about to see, this great multitude. So we'll go in there in first. But these are a first group that are introduced as a distinct group of people, 144,000 of them, before we talk about a multitude. And I've left this in for this reason. You will see that it says often a multitude from the great tribulation. We'll look at that in a moment. After these things I looked and beheld a great multitude which no one could number, so it's an impossible numbering, of all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues, standing before the throne and before the Lamb, clothed in white robes, with palm branches in their hand. They cry with a loud voice, the same as we've seen other groups cry before. Salvation belongs to our God who sits on the throne and to the Lamb. All the angels then stood around the throne, and the elders, and the four living creatures, and they all fell on their faces before the throne and worshipped God, saying, Amen. Blessing and glory and wisdom, thanksgiving and honor and power and might be to our God forever and ever. Amen. Let it be. It is a fact. So be it. This group is separate from the 144,000, but they are clearly still members of the saved, and they are unnumbered because they come from all nations, all tribes, all peoples, and all tongues. This group, as it says here, transcends time. Because some of these groups come from nations, which were established later, which were established much later in the time frames of how the world works. Some of these come from tribes, like the tribes of Israel, or the 12 tribes of Israel, the tribes of the Canaanites, the tribes of Gideon, the Midianites, those sorts of groups. They come from people who are not associated with tribes. This is a step backwards in time that John is trying to allude to. At the moment, we're all part of the Jewish nation under the Roman culture. But before that, we were parts of tribes. Before that, before Abraham, and before the 12 tribes of Israel were established through Abraham, we were peoples. We were just a group of people. And before that was the splitting of the tongues. He's going backwards in time and again reinforcing this timelessness of God, that God has saved people from the entire span of time, everywhere. And they are celebrating because they are saved. They're given white robes, they're given palm branches, which is the symbol of joy in that culture. They are crying that salvation belongs to God and on the throne, and they are thanking Him. Blessing, glory, wisdom, thanksgiving, honor, and power and might be to our God. They are thanking Him for their salvation. So this great multitude is a group that are saved. But they are again distinct and different from the 144,000. Now, when we look at the language that we've got here, John recognizes this group of people. John knows who these groups are. He says they're from all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues. He can see the mixture of who they are. He recognizes them as the saved immediately. He recognizes them as a group that they don't need to think about. We have a problem with the language in this next little section, that we have to look at the literary style and the story style of what John is asked and what John says here. Because John doesn't question who these people are. He simply recognizes that these 144,000 are separated, and then these guys come from everywhere. And because they're talking about salvation, he knows who they are. But one of the elders comes over to him and says, "Who are these arrayed in white, and where did they come from?" John knows this group. He says, "I know they came from all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues. I know that they are clothed in white raiments. I know who these people are. Why would someone step over and ask me who are they? What's the point in asking me a question that I already know the answer to? Does the elder not know? Surely that's impossible. One of the 24 people that advise God on everything, that can't be a thing." The fact that he also says, "Where did they come from?" indicates that it can't relate to this group. They are from all nations, tribes, peoples, and tongues standing before the throne. He knows where they came from. They come from all nations. They come from all tribes. They come from all people. This elder can't be referring to this unnumbered multitude. He has to be referring to this 144,000. Now, why is this elder asking John this question in the first place? He's testing John. He's saying to John, who recognized this group, because that's the way he writes. He's writing this saying, "I saw these people I recognized." And then the elder comes up to him and draws a distinction between these groups and the 144,000 he didn't recognize. The 144,000 that make up this group. And John responds exactly as he should. He humbles himself before the elder, and he doesn't answer the question, but he deflects it, saying, "You know, why don't you tell me?" So this is an important literary point that some people make the mistake of positioning this question to being about this unnumbered multitude. The unnumbered multitude are a group that John recognized. That the elder says to him, "Who are those who are also arrayed in white robes? And where did they come from? If you know where these guys come from, where did this bigger group come from? This smaller group, come from?" And he said to me, "These are those who have come out of great tribulation, have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb. Therefore they are before the throne of God." Now this group are surrounding the throne of God, but these are before the throne of God. "They serve him night and day in his temple." So these guys are surrounding the throne of God. But again, as you were saying before, John, We're introducing this temple language. These guys don't live around the throne room. They're in his temple. They're a different group. And he who sits on the throne will dwell among them. Future tense. It's not that he's there yet. He will dwell among them. They will neither hunger anymore, nor thirst anymore. The sun will not strike them, nor any heat. For the Lamb who is in the midst of the throne, right? Again, this Lamb is in the midst of the throne, will shepherd them and lead them to the living fountains of waters. So the Lamb, to answer the question again, John, Lamb's still in the midst of the throne. And God will wipe away every tear from their eye. This is the answer to that previous question at the end of chapter 6. Who will be able to stand? The 144,000. Why? They are sealed with the power of the living God. They are established in this opening part that says these are the ones who are not going to be stand. Who has the fear of judgment if you have nothing to be wrong with? When you stand up and say, I have done nothing wrong, so bring your judgments on, what fear do you have to have? Who shall be able to stand? The 144,000. But, and this is the dramatic part that brings in with this sealing work, and this is why this close of probation is so dramatic, this is the separation that happens at that moment. This is the sheep from the goats that we see in the book of Matthew. This is that movement where we have split up the people who are saved, as I was saying before, from the people who are not. This sealing work, that these 144,000 are protected, are the ones that are established as God's people and his New Jerusalem crew in that last day. They will serve him in the temple, and they will not experience the pains and pressures of this world, hunger, thirst, sun, or any heat, for the Lamb will be with them and shepherd them always. But, and this is the forebodingness, John was mentioning about my ability to set up a thing. It says, these are those who have come out of great tribulation. They have washed their robes in the blood of the Lamb and made them white, but they have had to do that through great tribulation. We're getting a glimpse here that the fact that they were hungry, the fact they were thirsty, the fact the sun and heat hit them is something that they had to go through. We're starting to get an impression of what these people in chapter 6 were so afraid of. They knew the power of God, and they were worried that they couldn't stand up to it, whereas these guys had to live through parts of that. They had to experience that, or at the very least they had to watch their friends and associates going through that. The time of trouble that comes after the close of probation is not going to be spared from these people. They're just protected from the judgments that are not meant for them. They will still have to live in the world. They will still have to watch people go around. There will still be shortages. And these three things, hunger, thirst, sunstroke, or heat in general, heat as a style, these three things, hunger, thirst, and heat, are things that everybody experiences. It would be difficult for God to say, well, I'll plant this little crop of wheat over here with this little stream of water running beside it so that my people can sit there, and I'll put a nice big tree up. So when that 144,000 just go and sit under that tree for the next couple of months while I punish the people over here when they don't have any cakes, that's not going to work. The three things that are mentioned here are the staples of the world that are just natural things that everybody has. And they are things that they're going to experience the same deprivations of. But the other things, the winds of strife, are held back from them. Now, we're going to go a lot more into this 144,000 by the time we hit chapter 14, which is where they're addressed in a much heavier way. But this is what establishes who they are. They are the new Jerusalem. They are the new 12 tribes of Israel. They are the new group that God has assigned himself to. These are they who have come out of great tribulation. They have to be the ones that live through the sealing, shaking, and that time of pain. And these are they who will live and see the second coming. So when we read in 1 Thessalonians 4, these are they who are alive and remain to be caught up together with them. And after this, we see when these people are there ready, in chapter 8 it opens and says the seventh seal was open and there was silence in heaven for about a half an hour. So after he sees these things, and we have to look at the connections between these. When the sixth seal is open, All these bad things happen. These are the bad things that happen at the opening of the sixth seal. But then when we look at how chapter 7 works in order to relate it to the seals into chapter 8, we see that as this seal is opened, a question is asked, who's able to stand? And then John is sort of taken a little bit of a step out. This was, if we were looking at this in literary language, we'd call this a soliloquy. This is a step away from the main storyline. And John is pivoted to see these four angels holding back the winds of strife from this answer to the fifth seal and saying, come on, you need to avenge us and you need to judge the earth. And those four angels are told by one that comes out to wait for a short amount of time. Just give us a moment, because I've got to seal up those people. I've got to seal up the people who aren't going to experience this, the people who didn't put the martyrs to death. I've got to I've got to protect them off from one side. And then John has shown who they are, the 144,000. But of course, John can't just look at them. He's looking at heaven. He's staring at the throne room. So he sees the rest of the great multitude. So he's seeing these other groups. And then he's introduced and said, okay, these are the judgments that are going to be coming from the earth. Everybody's afraid of this. Who's able to stand? Hey, yeah, John, those guys are weighed in white robes and that. Where do you think they came from? I don't know. You tell me, sir. These are the ones who have to live through this seal opening, who have to live through the close of probation, who have to live through this judgment, who have to see them there, who have to watch as their fellow servants and brethren are going to be killed and watch all these things be completed. But these are they who come out of that tribulation with their robes washed in the blood of the Lamb. They get the privilege of being before the throne of God and serving him night and day at the temple. These ones who are the ones who have to witness this fifth seal. So the witnesses, remember we go back to those names of who they are? The sixth seal is not about those painful people who are trying to beg for death in the light of the throne. The sixth seal is the 144,000 who are the witnesses to the judgments of God to make it righteous. These are they who will neither be hungry nor thirsty ever again, because they have gone through all the tribulations the world has. The first four seals are the first four phases of the church. Then the martyrs stand and say, is this God righteous enough to be able to open his thing? And then the 144,000 watch that until finally the seventh seal can be opened for them to receive what it is. Because at the moment the seventh seal is open, the book is now free. The book is now free for it. So as this is the seventh seal, this is when the inheritance can be laid out. This is when everything can be given in, eternal life or eternal damnation. This is after the close of probation and after that separation. So what else can follow? It has to be that time when these have witnessed, the 144,000 have witnessed the power of the Lamb to do the judgment. So the seventh seal has to be that second coming moment when the close of probation is. Nothing else can follow that. It has to come after those winds of strife are released, which is what these people were sealed up for. These people would be sealed up, the winds of strife would then be released, and they will witness the power of God to see that his judgment is true. And finally, we need to acknowledge that the silence can't be ended with the winds of strife, because these people have gone through hunger and thirst and all these other things. This is the group that has to step in. So one way or another, the second coming follows very quickly after the opening of the seventh seal, and we're going to layer more onto that. But the seventh seal has to be when this group are able to give their testimony and are able to say that all of the judgments of the Lord are true. That seventh seal can't be anything but the second coming. And the time period mentioned in the seventh seal, I'm sorry, I should have stopped and given you a chance to talk then, but I'll just finish you up here with this. The time period mentioned as the space of about a half an hour only translates to 7.5 literal days. If we take our analysis of 360 days to a Jewish year and convert them through, half an hour is only 7.5 literal days. That's a very short space of time. That's an extremely short space of time. So in this seventh seal, in this short space of time, the resurrection of the dead has to happen. The judgments have to have been already laid out. The translation of the righteous, dead, and living has to happen. Those who pierced Christ have to be resurrected to see his glory. And that's the moment when eternity starts. Now, as to why this is the 7 literal days adds to this, Mrs. White is probably the only evidence we have for this. And so I have to use her words. And in her writing on the 144,000, she says, Jesus' silver trumpet sounded, and he descended on a cloud wrapped in flames of fire. He gazed on the graves of the sleeping saints and raised his eyes and hands to heaven and cried, "Wake up, all you who sleep in the dust, arise." There was a mighty earthquake, and the graves opened. The dead came up, clothed with immortality. The 144,000 shouted, "Alleluia!" And they recognized their friends who had been torn from them by death, and in that same moment we were caught up with them to meet the Lord in the air. We all entered the cloud together and were 7 days ascending to the sea of glass, when Jesus brought crowns with his own right hand and placed them on our harps, and on our heads. He gave us harps of gold and palms of victory. 7 days it took her, when she saw the second coming, to get back to heaven. That's the only time period connection that we have in the Bible, or that we have on any other writing that connects up to this time frame. But the question then comes, well, why was heaven empty? Why was there silence in heaven for half an hour? The moment of the second coming is the conclusion of the judgment of God. Because as we're going to start to discuss, God is the one being judged, not us. God is one of the ones who is being judged through all of this. All heaven was empty because all of heaven comes with Christ to see the second coming. They have to see if this is real. They have to see if this is the real thing. There's nobody in heaven. It's astonishing to think that there's going to be nobody in heaven. Everybody's coming with Christ to demonstrate his power to all of the world. The judgment's completed, God vindicated, the demonstration of Jesus' power happens in that moment, and then it takes us a week to get back to heaven, a week to get back to that spot before the holy city can come down. So this seventh seal, because it is the moment when that book is open and the inheritance can be delivered, can't be anything other than the second coming of Christ. And it can't happen until after these people have witnessed the judgments. And it can't happen until the judgments are laid out, which is what these people in the fifth seal demand. So that is the end of the sealing work and the seals as they relate to the book that is in the little hand of the Lamb. Questions?
Wow.
I went fast at the end.
The 144,000.
Yep.
So you're saying that they're going to be at the end of probation, and they'll be the living at the end when the second coming comes.
Yep. If I can show you this, which is one of the things I said I made last week, but I didn't get a chance. I forgot about it, frankly. If we look at the way that the timelines work, so we've looked at the first four. We've looked at the churches, and I've put them up here on this timeline. The first church, Ephesus, second, third, fourth, and I've split them up. When we get to the fifth seal, the souls that
James, we're not seeing that screen yet.
Oh, sorry. Let me swap it over. That one. Seeing it now?
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. So this, I'm still working on this, obviously, but the seals under the altar are those that are the martyrs that lead up to the close of probation. So the fifth seal, the seals under the altar, are those who have died since Christ's death, because before that they're included in the unnumbered multitude, all the way through. Now the unnumbered multitude are all of those who were alive and died before Christ, and all those who lead up to the close of probation. The sixth seal, Revelation of Philadelphia, leads up to 1844. The seventh church, Laodicea, is from that moment in 1844, which we established from Daniel as the time frame. The seventh church leads into the second coming of Christ. The sixth seal, the cosmic disturbances, is that moment when probation closes. That is the moment, and I'll just expand these out so you can see them a little better. That is the... Not like that. The sixth seal is that moment of the close of probation. That is when probation closes. At that moment, the seals are laid down on the living God. Why is that? Yeah. There is no time that separates the close of probation, from the sealing from the close of probation. At that exact moment, the translation happens from the unnumbered multitude to those who are alive and are secured, sealed up for the second coming. They are the living at the second coming. That's what I read Revelation 7 to mean. So the 144,000 become the ones that are living on earth, that are separated, the sheep from the goats, so to speak, from the evil.
But what happens, right, I'll put it to you this way. You got someone who's, a Christian, believes, everything like that, and they go into the second, like probation finishes, they die. You're saying there's only going to be 144 left, religious people left at the second coming.
That's not a literal
that'll
number.
Be alive.
That's not a literal number.
Oh.
I don't believe that is a literal number. I don't believe there's going to be literally 144,000 people. Could be 100 million people. Could be 100 million Christians that go through because of this shaking that happens, because of this experience let me just swap this back. Because of this whole experience that happens where these people are shaken, some of these people are going to say, come and kill us because we don't want to be destroyed for the Lamb. But other people are going to say, can I sign up with you? Can I be saved? This shaking that happens, some of these people are going to be so afraid they're not going to be able to sign up with it. Others are going to say, all right, I want to swap my allegiances. I want to be a part of it. So I'm not in any way, shape or form saying this is literally 144,000 people. Does that make sense?
Yep. Fair enough.
It could be 100 million people. It could be 50,000 people. I don't know. And this is, again, something that is debated. The text is ambiguous on it. All the text says is that the division across the 12 tribes of Israel is even. But because we're in spiritual language, we're in language where these are from every tribe and all that sort of stuff, you can easily make the argument that it's not literally 144,000 people.
Yep.
One of the things about that 12 tribes too is that Manasseh is one of the children of Joseph. And he's listed in there. Mm-hmm. Ephraim's not. And so one of the other sons is actually missing.
Yeah, there's some changes if we go back to the text. Manasseh is there. Joseph is there.
So
I think that he and Manasseh sort of were merged together at some point. And you're right, Ephraim isn't there.
Yeah, but see...
And Levi is also bumped down quite a lot. Levi's usually one of the first ones, but the fact that the Levite priesthood is no longer necessary, he gets bumped down a lot.
Just when you go back to history, there were really 13 tribes when they went into the Promised Land. There was... Levi didn't get any land. Levi was sort of distributed sort of all over the place.
Yep.
And Manasseh and Ephraim were there in place of Joseph.
Yep.
So let's just get that again. To keep 12, you needed the two half tribes of Joseph.
Yep.
Which are Manasseh and Ephraim.
Yeah.
But this actually lists Joseph,
yep.
This lists Benjamin, this lists Levi, but there's still only 12 tribes here, so there's got to be one of the sons missed out here.
Yeah. And
so who is that?
It has to be Ephraim.
Why? No, but Ephraim wasn't a son. Ephraim was a son of Joseph, and Manasseh is a son of Joseph.
Let's look it up. 12 tribes of Israel. Right, we've got Reuben, Simeon, Leah, Judah. Issachar's not there, I don't think. Is he?
No.
Yeah, there he is.
I think you're right.
There.
Oh, yeah.
Is there?
Dan? Dan's not there.
No Dan.
No Dan. Huh. That might be something important to look at. Who was Dan? Huh. The name means judgment, or he judges. That might be a telling point, because there's no point in having a son called he judges if the judgments are all been done. You won't need a son, because each of these names, of course, is an important thing. Benjamin, child of sorrow, I think it was. Or each of these names is related to something too. There's no point in having a child called judgment if you're never going to have a judgment again. I don't know. I will have to look into that. That's an interesting thing. But why is Dan removed from that group? Manasseh is included and Joseph is included? That's an interesting question.
So if you're going to stick with the original tribes, you should have Manasseh out and Dan in.
Yeah, really.
So the question is, why is Dan not there? And then if you're going to have him out for some particular reason, why is Manasseh in and not Ephraim, who was the other half tribe?
There's a possibility early Christian writers such as Irenaeus and Hippolytus, which we've established were again around this time, believed the Antichrist would come from the tribe of Jan, and John the Apostle admits Dan from the 12 tribes of Israel. Instead, the tribe of Joseph bees twice also appeared with Manasseh. I'll have to look into that. I can't answer that at the moment, but I'll look into that, yeah.
I don't know the answer either, but I did find it interesting at one time when I looked at that list. Is there a further list of the 12 tribes around the gates or the foundation stones for the New Jerusalem?
From memory, 22? Starting 20. I think, if I remember correctly, there is one in 2022. No.
It makes reference to the 12 tribes, but I don't know whether it lists them.
Yeah, let's have a look. It'll be in here, because it won't be in the bounding of Satan. There we are. Having glory of God, her light was the most precious. So this is the New Jerusalem. She also had a great high wall with 12 gates and 12 angels at the gates, and the names written on them, which are the names of the 12 tribes of the children of Israel. 3 of the east, the north, the south, and the west. But no, they're not listed there.
So just that, when they're listing east, north, south, and west, remember they were arranged like that around the temple.
Yes, that's right.
So there might be a parallel, but I think you'll find that when they were arranged around the temple, it was the half tribes and that Levi's not included.
That's right, because Levi lives effectively in the temple, or it's supposed to.
In the temple, yeah.
I mean, not literally, obviously, because they had their tents and such nearby, but they worked in the temple.
They worked there, yeah.
But this
that's
is,
right.
again, you've got to remember, too, Joseph's line was seen... I don't want to say it was seen as more holy or anything, but because Joseph stood up to Potiphar's wife and the other things, his line was seen as a little bit more respectful than some of the other tribes. And if you look at the way the temple structure is done in the Old Testament, you have the most holy place in the center, surrounded by the temple structure, surrounded by the outer court, surrounded by the tribes of importance, and then the tribes as they went out were again in different levels of importance. That then was surrounded by desert. There is an interesting study been looked at that said that that's effectively the protection that God put on the earth to save it from His presence being there, because of how evil the earth was in a lot of ways. So there's that aspect of it too that you can take into account.
Okay.
Whereas here, you would argue, in the New Jerusalem, it's the level of glory and honor being bestowed upon these tribes. It's the glory and honor that's being put out to them. You know, in this city that's laid out like a square that's a massive spot, because you've got a glass sea that you are standing on in the throne room of God. You have this sort of a construction, so you're being given sets of privilege, being closer to or further away from the throne. I don't know if that translates the same way, because God is Spirit. Yeah.
I mean, just interesting to make these observations, and if there is any significance to them.
I agree. I have to look into that. I didn't put that together, but you're right. The tribe of Dan is removed. I'll look into why that is. That's an interesting point. All right. Any questions, debate? Are you okay with what I just said?
Well done.
No. Not for me. I've got phones going everywhere, though.
That's all right.
Popular man.
All right. Let's finish up with a prayer, and then I can let you go and get them. All right.
Thanks. Thanks, James.
Heavenly Father, we thank you this afternoon that we can once again come together to discuss your sealing work. We thank you for the ability and the privilege of being able to discuss and debate your word in such a free society, in such a free way. I pray that you will guide and bless us so that we may be a part of that 144,000, and that we may be able to be on your side and be those who can stand in those last days. Guide and direct David as he travels this week, and please give him travelling mercies, and keep us all safe and healthy so that we can meet again next week. In your holy and precious name we pray. Amen.
Amen.